I attended my son's wedding as a proud single dad, but my nameplate read low-educated fake dad. The bride's family laughed until my son said, "Dad, let's go home." The next day, their company faced a shock they never saw coming. I stood at the back of that marble ballroom in downtown Chicago, tugging at my department store suit that never quite fit right. 22 years. That's how long it had been since Sarah walked out, leaving me with a crying 3-year-old and a mountain of bills. 22 years of working construction during the day and stocking shelves at Home Depot at night. 22 years of mac and cheese dinners and second-hand clothes. But we made it work, my boy Trevor and I. And now here we were, crystal chandeliers casting golden light over tables that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Guests in designer gowns sipped champagne I couldn't pronounce. Trevor's wedding day. My chest swelled with pride as I watched my son, tall and handsome in his custom tuxedo, laughing with his new bride's family near the orchestra pit. I made my way to the family table, searching for my seat. The bride's family, the Hawthorns, had spared no expense. Even the name cards were embossed with gold lettering. I found mine easily enough. Austin Mitchell, father of the groom. But underneath, someone had added something in elegant script with what looked like a gold pen. Low-educated fake dad. My blood turned cold. Surely this was some kind of mistake, but then I heard it. The snickering from across the table. Dr. Richard Hawthorne, the bride's father and some big-shot cardiologist at Northwestern Memorial, was smirking behind his whiskey glass. His wife, Victoria, had her manicured hand pressed to her lips, trying to muffle her laughter. Their son, Bradford, leaned over to his cousin and whispered something that made them both burst out laughing while staring directly at me. "Well, what did you expect?" I heard Dr. Hawthorne say to his wife. "The man builds houses for a living. Probably dropped out of high school to support some teenage pregnancy." My hands shook as I quietly flipped the nameplate face down and tried to sit, but the damage was done. The laughter spread like wildfire through their side of the table. 22 years of sacrifice. 22 years of being both mother and father to Trevor, reduced to a joke for their entertainment. I stood up, ready to walk out with whatever dignity I had left. But just as I turned toward the exit, a firm hand caught mine. "Dad?" Trevor's voice was quiet but steady. His eyes met mine, and I saw something burning there. Something I hadn't seen since he was 12 and stood up to bullies at Jefferson Elementary. "Let's go home," Trevor said. "It's your wedding," I whispered. "Let's go home," he repeated louder this time. The orchestra stopped mid-song. Conversations died. 300 guests turned to stare as my son looked directly at the Hawthorne family table and said clearly, "You all just made the biggest mistake of your lives." He didn't yell. He didn't explain. He just walked out of that ballroom with me, leaving his bride and her family stunned in our wake. And the next day changed everything. The drive back to my little apartment in Rogers Park was dead silent, except for the hum of Trevor's Tesla, a car that still made me uncomfortable every time I saw it. He'd bought it last year with his tech job, though he'd always been vague about the details. My son kept his eyes on Lakeshore Drive, jaw clenched tight as Lake Michigan stretched out dark and endless beside us. Not a word until we reached my building. The same 3-story walk-up where I'd raised him, where the radiator still clanged in winter, where Mrs. Rodriguez upstairs still played her telenovelas too loud. As I fumbled for my keys, Trevor finally broke the silence. "You know, Dad, I saw it." I froze. "The nameplate?" "I saw it before you did," he said. "I was watching from the side when Bradford's cousin wrote it. I was waiting to see what you'd do." My heart sank. "Then why didn't you stop them? Why didn't you say something sooner?" Trevor looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since his mother left. Raw pain mixed with something harder, colder. "Because I needed to know if they'd really do it. If they'd actually humiliate the man who raised me on the most important day of my life." His voice cracked slightly. "And they did." He pulled out his iPhone and showed me a video. Security footage somehow. Dr. Hawthorne laughing as he handed the gold pen to Bradford's cousin. Victoria joking about trailer trash walking among civilized people. And worst of all, Trevor's bride, Stephanie herself, nodding and saying, "My real father is the man I'm marrying into money with. That construction worker, he's just a formality." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, but Trevor, he was ice-cold calm. "Dad," he said quietly, "there's something I never told you. I never signed their prenup." I blinked. "You didn't?" They begged me to. Dr. Hawthorne even offered to invest in my little computer business if I'd sign it. Trevor's smile was sharp as a razor. But by then, I'd already built something. Quietly with my college roommate Jake, a cybersecurity firm called Fortress Digital. My mind reeled. "Trevor, what are you saying?" "Last year, Microsoft acquired us, clean deal, all cash." He looked me straight in the eye. "I made $47 million, Dad. Enough to buy and sell the entire Hawthorne family empire if I wanted to." I sat down hard on my old couch, the same one where I'd helped him with homework for 12 years. Trevor opened his laptop. They thought they were getting a trophy husband, some naive kid they could mold and control. What they didn't realize is that I've been playing chess while they were playing checkers. His fingers flew over the keyboard, and tomorrow morning they're going to find out who they really tried to humiliate. I woke up at 5 a.m. to the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the instant stuff I usually made. Trevor was already dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than my truck, standing at my kitchen counter with a manila folder thick as a phone book. "Today's the day, Dad," he said. "Today they learn who you really are to me. Not some fake dad, but the man who made me everything I am." He handed me the folder. Inside were financial reports, ownership documents, and corporate filings. The Hawthorne family business, Hawthorne Hospitality Group, a chain of luxury hotels and restaurants across the Midwest, was bleeding money quietly, desperately. And Trevor had been buying up their silent partner shares for the past year through shell companies with names like Fortress Holdings and Mitchell Investment Trust. "You already own part of their company?" I whispered. Trevor's grin was wolfish. "Try 48%, and as of 9 a.m. today, when the Henderson Pension Fund sells me their 12% stake, I'll own the majority." 9:15 a.m. Hawthorne Hospitality Headquarters, The Loop. Trevor walked into that glass tower like he owned it, which I was starting to realize he basically did. Receptionists stopped mid-call, their jaws dropping as they recognized the construction worker's son from the wedding disaster that was already gossip mill gold. The boardroom was packed. Dr. Hawthorne sat at the head of that polished mahogany table, still wearing yesterday's arrogance like an expensive cologne. "What's the meaning of this?" he barked as Trevor calmly took a seat and placed that thick folder on the table. Trevor's voice was steady as granite. "Effective immediately, I control 51% of Hawthorne Hospitality Group. Here's the documentation. Feel free to have your lawyers verify." The silence was deafening. Then came the whispers, the frantic phone calls, the rustle of papers as Dr. Hawthorne's hands shook while reading the proof of his empire's new ownership. "You little parasite," Dr. Hawthorne sputtered, veins bulging in his neck. Trevor didn't even blink. "No, Richard," he said, his tone calm and razor-sharp. "I'm the product of the man you mocked, the construction worker who built this city's skyline while you played golf at country clubs, the fake dad who worked 16-hour days so I could go to Northwestern, the same university where you lecture medical students about ethics." The boardroom was dead silent. "Let me be crystal clear," Trevor continued, turning to address the other board members. "I won't dissolve the company today, but effective immediately, Dr. Hawthorne, his wife, his daughter, and every member of their family are terminated from all positions. Security will escort you out. Your severance packages will be mailed." Dr. Hawthorne lunged forward. "You can't do this! This is my company, my father's company!" Trevor's voice remained level. "It was your company. Now it belongs to the man you called a fake dad, through me." And with that, we walked out, leaving the Hawthorne legacy in ashes. The weeks following what the Chicago Tribune called the wedding revenge takeover were a whirlwind. Trevor's story spread like wildfire through social media and business circles. Headlines ranged from groom shocks elite in-laws to from hard hat to hostile takeover. My son, once dismissed as a construction worker's kid, was now being invited to speak at Harvard Business School and featured on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine. As for Stephanie Hawthorne, well, she disappeared from Instagram faster than ice in July. Her carefully curated life of yacht parties and designer brunches went dark overnight. Word around Chicago was that she and her parents were now facing federal investigations for embezzling funds and backdoor deals that Trevor's forensic accountants had uncovered during the acquisition. But Trevor, he just kept working, kept building. He moved his company headquarters to a gleaming new office in River North, but still came by my apartment every Sunday for pot roast and Cubs games, just like when he was 10 years old. Then came that rainy Thursday evening in October when someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find Stephanie Hawthorne standing in my hallway, soaked from the storm, her designer makeup running down her cheeks like watercolors. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to speak with Trevor." I called him over. He appeared in the doorway, took one look at her, and his expression didn't change an inch. "Stephanie." "Trevor, I made a terrible mistake." The words tumbled out of her. "I was under so much pressure from my parents, from everyone. They always made me feel like you weren't enough, like your father was beneath us. But I realize now." Trevor raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "You realize now that the man you insulted owns the building you're standing in front of." Her eyes widened. She looked past him to me, sitting on my old couch. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. I was young and stupid and... Stop." My voice was quiet but firm. "You're not sorry for what you did, sweetheart. You're sorry for how it turned out." She froze like a deer in headlights. Trevor pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Your parents signed this when they were desperate to liquidate their remaining assets. It's a non-compete clause that prevents any member of your family from working in or holding shares in any hospitality business in Illinois for the next 20 years. He handed it to her. "That includes you." Tears streamed down her face. "Trevor, please, can't we just talk? Work something out?" He looked at her one last time, and I saw in his eyes the same quiet strength I'd tried to teach him all those years ago. "You had your chance to talk, Stephanie. You chose mockery over respect. You chose public humiliation over love. Now I choose my father's dignity over your regret." And he closed the door gently but with finality. 6 months later, I was sitting in the front row of the Chicago Hilton's Grand Ballroom. Not as a wedding guest this time, but as the guest of honor. Trevor stood at the podium in a navy suit, addressing a crowd of Chicago's business elite, city officials, and scholarship recipients. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to announce the launch of the Austin Mitchell Foundation for Working Families Education." The applause was thunderous. Mayor Johnson stepped up to shake Trevor's hand. "What inspired you to start this scholarship program?" she asked into the microphone. Trevor's eyes found mine in the crowd. That man right there, Austin Mitchell. The one who was mocked for building this city with his hands. The one who worked 2 jobs so I could have one. The man who taught me that real worth isn't measured in bank accounts or degrees. It's measured in integrity, sacrifice, and love. I felt tears sting my eyes as 300 people rose to their feet in applause. For the first time in my life, I felt like the richest man in the room. After the ceremony, Trevor and I walked along the Chicago Riverwalk, the city lights dancing on the water like scattered diamonds. "You didn't have to name it after me," I said quietly. He stopped walking and turned to face me. "Dad, everything I am, everything I've built exists because you believed in me when nobody else would. When Mom left, when kids at school made fun of my secondhand clothes, when guidance counselors said I should consider realistic career options, you never stopped believing. I thought about that scared, single father I'd been 22 years ago, wondering how I'd ever raise a boy on my own. Looking at Trevor now, successful, principled, strong, I realized I hadn't just raised a son. I'd raised a man who knew the difference between being rich and having worth. Besides, Trevor grinned, I figure it's about time the Hawthorne family learned what a real legacy looks like. The foundation would go on to provide full scholarships to over 500 children from working-class families. But that night, walking along the river with my son, I knew I'd already received the greatest return on investment a father could ask for. 2 years passed and life settled into a rhythm I'd never dared dream of. Trevor's company continued to grow, with offices now in New York and San Francisco. The foundation was thriving, sending kids from backgrounds like ours to colleges across the country. And me, I still lived in my little apartment in Rogers Park, still drove my old Ford F-150, still watched Cubs games with Mrs. Rodriguez upstairs, but I wasn't the same man who'd walked into that wedding reception with his ill-fitting suit and wounded primeur. I carried myself differently now, not because of money, but because I'd learned that a man's worth isn't determined by what others think of him. It's determined by what he builds, what he gives, and who he raises. Then came the phone call that would test everything. Dad, you need to see something. Trevor's voice was tight when he called me that September morning. Turn on Channel 7 News. I grabbed my remote with shaking hands. There on the screen was a familiar face. Dr. Richard Hawthorne, standing outside the federal building in downtown Chicago, flanked by lawyers and cameras, charges of insurance fraud and tax evasion spanning 5 years. The reporter was saying the Hawthorne family faced potential prison time and millions in penalties. This comes just 2 years after their hospitality empire was acquired in a hostile takeover by cybersecurity mogul Trevor Mitchell, the anchor added. I muted the TV and called Trevor back. How are you handling this? There was a long pause. Honestly, Dad, I feel empty. I thought I'd feel vindicated, you know, but watching them fall apart like this, seeing Stephanie's kids affected by their parents' choices, it just makes me sad. That's when I knew I'd raised him right. Revenge might have been sweet for a moment, but real strength, real character, meant knowing when to stop fighting and start healing. Son, I said quietly, maybe it's time to think about what comes next. What do you want to build instead of what you want to tear down? 5 years after that disastrous wedding, I found myself in another fancy ballroom. But this time, everything was different. The Austin Mitchell Foundation's annual gala was being held at the Palmer House, with over 800 guests celebrating our scholarship recipients. As I looked around the room, I saw faces that told a story I was proud to be part of. Maria Santos, whose mother cleaned office buildings, was now a resident at Johns Hopkins. David Kim, whose father drove a taxi, was finishing his MBA at Wharton. Sarah Williams, whose grandfather had worked construction alongside me, was starting her own tech company. Trevor took the stage to thunderous applause. At 30, he'd grown into the kind of man I'd always hoped he'd become. Successful, yes, but more importantly, generous and grounded. 5 years ago, he began, my father and I walked out of a wedding where people laughed at us for who we were. Tonight we celebrate not what divides us, but what unites us. The belief that every child deserves a chance to dream big, regardless of where they come from. He paused, scanning the crowd. And I have an announcement. The foundation is expanding. We're not just funding college educations anymore. We're creating apprenticeship programs, trade school scholarships, and small business loans for working families. Because success isn't just about getting a degree, it's about building a life of purpose and dignity. The applause was deafening, but what moved me most was what I saw in the back corner of the room. Stephanie Hawthorne, now Stephanie Walsh, remarried to a high school teacher, was quietly applauding. Her children, a boy and a girl around 8 and 10, sat beside her. She caught my eye and nodded, not in defeat, but in what looked like respect. After the ceremony, she approached me cautiously. Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to thank you. I raised an eyebrow. Thank me? The foundation gave my daughter a scholarship to music camp last summer. She doesn't know it came from you, but I do. Her voice cracked slightly. After everything I did, everything my family did, you still helped my child. I looked at this woman who had once laughed at my son's wedding, who had called me a fake father, and I felt something I hadn't expected, compassion. "Stephanie," I said gently, "children aren't responsible for their parents' mistakes. Your daughter deserves every opportunity to shine, regardless of our history." She wiped tears from her eyes. "I'm trying to teach them differently. Teach them to judge people by their character, not their bank accounts or their jobs. That's all any of us can do," I replied. "Try to be better than we were yesterday." As the evening wound down, Trevor and I stood on the hotel balcony looking out over the Chicago skyline. A skyline I'd helped build with my own hands all those decades ago. "Dad, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed at that wedding?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Honestly, son, I think everything happened exactly as it needed to. That humiliation taught us both something important, that our worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. It's determined by how we treat others, how we face adversity, and what we choose to build with our lives." Trevor smiled. "You know what the best part is? The Hawthorne name is remembered for scandal and fraud, but the Mitchell name is going to be remembered for giving kids a chance." As we watched the city lights twinkle below us, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories aren't about defeating your enemies. They're about becoming the kind of person who doesn't need enemies at all. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, loving deeply, and lifting others up along the way. The scared single father who walked into that ballroom 5 years ago with his ill-fitting suit and wounded pride was gone. In his place stood a man who knew his worth, not because his son was successful, but because he'd raised a son who used his success to make the world a little bit better. And that, I thought, was a legacy worth building. What would you have done in Austin's situation? Share your thoughts. And don't forget to follow for more stories of resilience, family, and unexpected triumph. Because sometimes the greatest victories come not from getting even, but from rising above.